All right, welcome aboard. We'll be looking at John Marshall. The essay prompt for John Marshall is to discuss the development of the federal court system and show how John Marshall played a key role in its development. So, in order to fulfill the demands of the Constitution for a federal court system, Congress passed the Judiciary Act of September 24, 1789. The Judiciary Act created a Supreme Court staffed by a Chief Justice and 5 Associate Justices, 3 Circuit Courts, and with 2 Supreme Court Justices on each Circuit Court, and 13 District Courts authorized to review the decisions of the state court. So that was its original inception. It also created the Office of the Attorney General, as well as all other miscellaneous offices necessary to run the new government. Example, the U.S. Marshals and a postal system was part of that legislation as well. Most important of all, the Judiciary Act provided for the principle of judicial review by stating that all disputes over the meaning of the Constitution, federal laws, and treaties must be settled by the Supreme Court. There are 2 types of judicial reviews to keep in mind: reviewing the Constitution and federal legislation using a loose or strict interpretation of the Constitution, and reviewing state laws and court decisions involving powers and duties delegated by the Constitution to the federal government. And what we want to keep in mind, although it was the Judiciary Act that created the principle of judicial review, it was up to John Marshall, the nation's 4th Chief Justice, to put it into use. And so that's what we're going to take a look at, some of just 3 of his many important decisions he made while on the court as Chief Justice, in exercising judicial review and really making judicial review a central part of a strong central government. So Marshall's significance lies in the fact that he got people to start thinking nationally as a result of his 34 years as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Though his judicial interpretations, through his judicial interpretations, he helped cement the nation together by spelling out the procedure by which the federal courts could review state laws and state court decisions involving powers and duties delegated by the Constitution to the federal government. Also, Marshall's use of a loose interpretation of the Constitution in reviewing the Constitution kept the states from overruling federal laws and thus established the federal system on a sound basis. So this is something really important to keep in mind. He is really much a Hamiltonian. He understands the principle of applied powers, or the elastic clause that we spoke of earlier, where the Constitution is not, if it doesn't have to be specifically laid out in the Constitution, is basically what it says, what it means to have a loose interpretation of the Constitution. And so in doing this, he is going to really he's really going to establish the federal government dominance over the states' governments. Marshall's contribution can be best evaluated by a review of some of his most important decisions. And what we're going to look at is Marbury versus Madison, 1803, McCulloch versus Maryland, and Dartmouth College versus Woodworth, both of those in 1819. So an example of reviewing the Constitution and federal legislation is definitely seen in the case of Marbury versus Madison. So an appointment made by John Adams, the 2nd President of the United States, in 1801, presented Marshall with a historic opportunity to establish the principle of judicial review. When William Marbury, whom President Adams had named a Justice of the Peace for the District of Columbia, learned that his commission was being denied him by the new Secretary of State, James Madison, Madison was appointed by the new president, Thomas Jefferson. He sued for its delivery. So Marshal knew that Jefferson or Madison would hardly spring forward to enforce a writ to deliver the commission to his fellow Federalist Marbury. His fellow being Marshal, that is. Both of them were Federalists. Madison and Jefferson are Democratic Republicans, so you got this partisan issue going on here. He therefore dismissed Marbury's suit, avoiding a direct political showdown, but at the same time, he won a political victory by stating that part of the Judiciary Act of 1789, on which Marbury tried to base his appeal, was unconstitutional. Marshal said the act had attempted to assign to the Supreme Court powers that the Constitution had not foreseen. In self-denying opinion, Marshal greatly magnified the authority of the Supreme Court. Until this case, controversy had clouded the question of who had the final authority to determine the meaning of the Constitution. Jefferson and Madison in Virginia and the Kentucky resolutions of 1789 had tried to assign the right to the individual states. But now Marshal had established the fact that the Supreme Court alone had the last word on the question of constitutionality. So looking at McCulloch versus Maryland and Dartmouth College versus Woodward of 1819, both of these cases bolstered the power of the federal government at the expenses of the states as well. So in McCulloch versus Maryland, the suit involved an attempt by the state of Maryland to destroy a branch of the Bank of the United States by imposing a tax on its notes. Marshal, speaking for the court, declared the bank constitutional by invoking the Hamiltonian doctrine of implied powers. This is the doctrine of a loose interpretation of the Constitution. Marshal thus strengthened the federal authority when he denied the right of Maryland to tax the bank. With strong emphasis, he affirmed the power to tax involves the power to destroy. So he was saying to the state of Maryland, you do not have that power to tax this bank. And that power to create implies the power to preserve. And so the federal government only had jurisdiction over this, and so the state of Maryland had no business taxing it in the first place. Marshal's ruling gave the doctrine of loose construction of the Constitution its most famous formulation. He argued that the Constitution was derived from the consent of the people and thus permitted the government to act for their benefit. He further stated that the Constitution was, quote, intended to endure for ages to come and consequently to be adapted to various crises of human affairs. And this idea of the Constitution is what is described as a living document. So the Constitution is often described as a living document. It adapts, it changes to the world in which it resides in. It's not this old rusty, dusty thing that's kept in the archives and kept in a vault in history. It is very much part of this day. And this is what John Marshall understood about the Constitution. A similar example was Dartmouth College versus Woodward case, in which Marshall, the court, invalidated state laws conflicting with the federal Constitution and protected property rights against popular pressures. The college had been granted a charter by King George III in 1769, but the state legislature of New Hampshire had seen fit to change it. Dartmouth appealed the case, so New Hampshire wants to revoke the charter, in other words. Marshall put the state firmly in its place when he ruled that the original charter must stand. It was a contract, and the Constitution protected contracts against state encroachments. The Dartmouth decision safeguarded business enterprises from domination by the states, but it had the unfortunate effect of creating a precedent that enabled chartered corporations in later years to escape the handcuffs of needed public control. And this is a problem today. Corporations today are considered legal persons, and it's very difficult to revoke their charters if they're not upholding what's called the stakeholders. That is, the people living within the community that might be affected by the decisions of that corporation. And so it's very difficult in some cases to sue a corporation and to dismantle it if it's seen fit not to be in the public interest. Marshall's decision are definitely felt today. In this sense, his nationalism was the most enduring of the era. He supported a strong federal government and helped to mold a stable, nationally uniform environment for business, and thus ranks as one of the foremost creators of the existing national government. So John Marshall, probably of any of these gentlemen that we're looking at, really shaped the strength of the federal government. And again, this isn't to say it's wrong or right, but a lot of people hearken back to this time and say, the founding fathers would be rolling over in their graves if they knew how powerful the federal government was today. No, they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't. They desperately wanted a strong central government, and John Marshall was probably the strongest advocate for that. Now, he couldn't have gotten away with this by himself. He had a lot of support for this, and the framers of the Constitution, who were still politically involved during John Marshall's reign, were very happy to see the federal government take precedent over the states. All right, that's for John Marshall. I'll see you in the next lecture. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns.